The air hums with a restless, jagged edge inside a cramped, sweat-soaked courtroom where a black man stands alone, his shoulders squared, his worn jacket hanging loose over a frame built from years of resilience. His name is Caleb Jackson, 35 years old, a self-taught legal warrior with a mind sharper than any blade forged in the fires of law school, a man who's turned pages of borrowed books into weapons of justice. But today, right now, he's not standing here as a hero. Not yet. He's a defendant, chained by a lie, accused of a crime he didn't commit, his wrists bound by the weight of a system that's never seen him as anything but a shadow to be swept aside. Across the room, behind a towering oak bench, sits Judge Harold Grayson, 63, white-haired, wiry, his face a map of wrinkles carved by decades of unchecked power, his lips curled into a sneer that drips with contempt, a laugh bubbling up from his throat like he's watching a comedy instead of a trial. He looks at Caleb and sees a punchline, a black man daring to step into his kingdom of gavels and robes, and he's ready to swat him down with a flick of his wrist. But in the next hour, you're about to witness a story so raw, so fierce, so electrifying. It'll grab you by the throat and refuse to let go, a tale where racism's ugly, grinning face gets smashed to pieces by a black genius who turns the law into a hammer and swings it with precision. This isn't just a courtroom drama, this is a battle, a war, a triumph that'll make your blood sing and your fists clench. Welcome to Black Triumph Stories. Get ready, because we're diving headfirst into the fire right now. It's a blistering afternoon in Macon, Georgia, the kind of day where the sun doesn't just shine, it presses down on you, relentless, heavy, like a hand shoving you into the dirt, daring you to stand back up. The heat seeps into everything. The cracked sidewalks outside, the peeling paint on the old courthouse walls, the air itself, thick and sticky, clinging to your skin, like a second layer you can't peel off. Inside the courthouse on 3rd Street, it's no better. The place feels less like a hall of justice and more like a furnace, a relic of a time when these walls were built to keep some people in and others out. The wooden benches groan under the weight of a sparse, restless crowd, locals mostly. A handful of them, their faces glistening with sweat, fanning themselves with folded newspapers they picked up from the gas station down the road. A few reporters sit scattered among them, notebooks open, pens scratching lazily, their eyes half-lidded from the heat but sharp enough to catch a story if it breaks. The ceiling fans spin above, slow and tired, their hum a low drone that blends with the murmurs of the room, a soundtrack to a day that's already dragging on too long. At the defendant's table alone stands Caleb Jackson, 35 years old, broad-shouldered, his frame lean but solid, built from years of lifting crates in warehouses and carrying the weight of a life that's never let him rest easy. His close-cropped hair is flecked with early gray, a mark of stress more than age, and his dark eyes burn with a quiet intensity, steady as coal under pressure, the kind of eyes that don't blink when the world tries to stare them down. He's dressed in a second-hand jacket, faded at the elbows, a tie knotted tight against a shirt that's seen better days, but he wears it all like armor, like it's enough to shield him from what's coming. Caleb's no stranger to hard times. He grew up in a shotgun house on Macon's east side, a narrow clapboard shack where the roof leaked when it rained and the walls shook when the trains rolled by. Books were scarce back then, luxuries his family couldn't afford. But grit was plentiful, handed down from his grandmother who scrubbed floors to feed him, and his mother who worked doubles at the diner to keep the lights on. He taught himself to read with whatever he could scrounge, old comics, church pamphlets, anything with words, and when he stumbled on a tattered law book in a library discard bin at 16, something clicked. He devoured it, page by yellowed page, memorizing statutes, cases, rules, while the world around him kept spinning its chaos. Nights at the warehouse, stacking boxes until his hands bled, he'd recite legal codes in his head, turning exhaustion into fuel, building a mind that could outthink anyone who dared to doubt him. Today, though, he's not here as a scholar or a dreamer. He's here as a defendant accused of assault, a charge pinned on him like a badge of shame by a white store clerk named Vernon Hayes, a man with a pinched face and a grudge who didn't like Caleb asking questions about a receipt that didn't add up. It's a flimsy story. Vernon claims Caleb swung at him in broad daylight right there in the shop. But the truth is simpler, uglier. Caleb caught him overcharging, called it out, and Vernon turned it into a fight he could win by crying victim to the cops. 5 years, that's what Caleb's facing. If this goes south, 5 years torn away from his daughter Leela, a bright-eyed 8-year-old who waits for him every night with her homework spread out on their rickety kitchen table. 5 years stripped from his job, his home, his fight to build something better. No lawyer would take his case, not for free, not for a black man with no cash to spare. So Caleb stands alone, his only weapons that jacket, that mind, and a stack of papers he's clutched like a lifeline. Across the room, behind the towering oak bench, sits Judge Harold Grayson, 63 years old, wiry as a scarecrow, his white hair a wild mane that spills over his collar, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by decades of wielding power like a club. His black robes hang loose on his frame, but his smirk fits him tight, a perfect match for the glint in his pale blue eyes, a look that says he's already decided this trial before a single word's been spoken, a look that says Caleb's just another case to stamp and toss aside. Grayson's a relic of the Old South, a man born into a world where men like him ruled without question, where the gavel was his scepter and the courtroom his kingdom. He spent 30 years on that bench, doing out sentences like a landlord collecting rent, harsh for some, lenient for others, depending on the face looking back at him. His record's a quiet scandal. Black defendants get the book thrown at them, white ones get a nod and a warning, and he's never hidden his disdain for anyone who dares challenge his throne. Today, he's in his element, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting to play his part in this tired script. The bailiff steps forward, a hulking figure in a beige uniform, his voice booming through the room. All rise for the Honorable Harold Grayson. The crowd shuffles to its feet, a reluctant wave of motion, and Caleb stands too, his back straight, his hands clasped in front of him, his breathing slow and deliberate. The charge hangs over him like a storm cloud, assault, a felony, a lie spun into a noose, and he knows what's at stake. This isn't just about Vernon Hayes or a bad day at the store. It's about a system that's never seen him as equal. A system that's always ready to believe the worst of him because of the skin he's in. Grayson settles into his seat, his eyes locking onto Caleb, and there's a flicker there, amusement, disdain, a predator sizing up prey he's already dismissed. The bailiff calls the room to order. The gavel taps once, and the trial begins, the air thick with the weight of what's about to unfold. The trial kicks off with a thud that reverberates through the room. The prosecutor, a slick-haired white man named Ellis Tate, strides to the center of the courtroom, his polished shoes clicking on the worn hardwood floor, his suit crisp and tailored, a stark contrast to Caleb's faded jacket. He's young, maybe 30, with a drawl that stretches every vowel like taffy, and he lays out the case with the confidence of a man who's never lost in this room. Caleb Jackson assaulted Mr. Vernon Hayes, a respectable shopkeeper, in broad daylight on June 14th, he says, his voice smooth and practiced, tossing a grainy security photo onto the evidence table like it's a trump card. The image is blurry, a mess of shadows and shapes. Caleb's there, pointing a finger, not swinging a fist, but Ellis spins it like a masterpiece of guilt. This man attacked an innocent citizen, unprovoked. In a fit of rage, he continues, pacing now, his hands gesturing wide, painting a picture for the crowd. The locals shift in their seats, whispers rippling through the benches like a breeze through dry grass, a mix of boredom and curiosity stirring them awake. The reporters jot notes, their pens scratching faster now, sensing the story taking shape. Judge Grayson leans back in his chair, arms crossed tight over his chest, a chuckle rumbling low in his throat, a sound that's half amusement, half scorn. His pale eyes flick to Caleb, sizing him up, and he doesn't bother hiding the smirk tugging at his lips. "This the best you've got, boy?" he says, his voice dripping with mockery, his southern accent thick and slow, each word a jab. You think you're some kind of lawyer now? Standing there in that rag of a coat? The room catches the jab. Ellis smirks. A few locals snicker, the air tightening with the weight of Grayson's disdain. Caleb stands tall, his shoulders squared, his face a mask of calm, refusing to bend under the judge's gaze. "Your Honor," he says, his voice steady, clear, cutting through the laughter like a blade, "I'm representing myself, and I'll prove my innocence with the facts." Grayson laughs louder this time, a barking sound that bounces off the walls, sharp and cruel, his gavel tapping the bench like it's a toy he's playing with. "Innocence?" he says, leaning forward, now his smirk widening into a grin. "Son, you're lucky I don't lock you up right now for wasting my time with this nonsense. You think you can stroll in here and play Perry Mason?" The crowd shifts again, a low hum of amusement spreading, but Caleb's eyes don't waver. They lock on to Grayson, unblinking, a quiet fire burning behind them. He steps forward, just a half step, enough to claim the space, his voice still calm but firm, carrying a weight that silences the room for a moment. "I'd like to question the witness, Your Honor," he says, his tone a challenge wrapped in respect. A dare Grayson can't ignore. The judge waves a hand, dismissive, his grin still plastered on. "Go on then, entertain us," he says, leaning back again, arms folding like he's settling in for a show. "Let's see what you've got, boy." The word boys lands like a slap, deliberate, heavy, but Caleb doesn't flinch. He nods once, turns to the witness stand, and waits. Vernon Hayes shuffles forward, a balding man in his 50s, pale skin flushed from the heat, his shirt stained with sweat under the arms, his hands fidgeting as he climbs into the box. He swears to tell the truth, his voice shaky, a twitch in his lip betraying his nerves, and Caleb steps closer, his presence steady, commanding. "Mr. Hayes," he starts, his tone simple, direct. "You say I hit you. Where exactly did I hit you?" Hayes blinks, caught off guard, his hand hovering over his chest before pointing vaguely. Right here, my chest." He mumbles, his eyes darting to Ellis, then Grayson looking for a lifeline. Caleb nods, slow, deliberate, letting the answer hang. "Funny," he says, his voice calm but edged with something sharp, "because that security photo you submitted, it shows my hands nowhere near you. I'm pointing, not swinging. How do you explain that?" The room stirs, heads turning, whispers growing louder, but Grayson cuts in before Hayes can answer, his gavel tapping again, his voice booming. "Enough of these games, sit down, boy, you're not fooling anyone." Caleb doesn't sit. He stands his ground, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a folded piece of paper worn at the edges, but crisp where it matters. "This is the store receipt from that day," he says, holding it up, letting the crowd see it, letting the weight of it sink in. "It shows a $20 overcharge on my purchase, a bottle of milk and a loaf of bread for my daughter. I asked for a refund, Mr. Hayes. Not a fight. You refused, got loud, and called the cops. When I wouldn't back down." Grayson snorts, a harsh, dismissive sound, leaning forward now, his eyes narrowing. "You expect me to believe that? A receipt proves nothing. You people always got some excuse, some story to wiggle out of trouble." The room tenses, "you people" echoes like a gunshot, raw and ugly. A line cross that everyone feels but few dare call out. The reporters scribble faster. The crowd holds its breath. But Caleb doesn't blink, he presses on, his voice rising just enough to carry over Grayson's sneer. "Then explain the security log, Your Honor," he says, pulling another paper from his stack, his hand steady as he unfolds it. It's time-stamped. Shows I left the store at 2:47 p.m., 10 minutes before the police arrived. No assault, no fight, just a man walking away from a clerk who wouldn't do right. I've got the log right here, pulled from the store's own system. Grayson's smirk fades just for a heartbeat, a flicker of unease crossing his face, But he doubles down, slamming his gavel harder this time, the sound cracking through the room. Logs lie, he snaps, his voice tight, his authority flexing. Machines glitch, timestamps shift. You're guilty because I say you're guilty, and that's the end of it. The injustice burns, hot, palpable, a fire licking at the edges of the room. The crowd sees it, feels it, a murmur swelling among them. Some nod, some shake their heads, but all eyes are on Caleb now. Ellis shifts in his seat, his slick confidence wavering, his hands fumbling with his notes, but Grayson's still in control, still towering, still laughing inside at the black man who dares to fight back. Caleb doesn't waver. He stands there, papers in hand, his jaw set, his eyes locked on Grayson, and you can feel it, taste it in the air. He's not just defending himself, he's dismantling something bigger, something older, something that's festered in these walls for generations. "I'm not done, Your Honor," he says, his voice a quiet storm, building, rolling, unstoppable. "You want the truth? I've got more than your laugh can bury, more than your gavel can silence." The room leans in, the tension coiling tighter, every breath held, every heartbeat loud, because Caleb's not just playing defense, he's laying a trap, piece by careful piece, and Grayson doesn't see it yet. The judge's sneer holds, but there's a crack in it now, a shadow of doubt he can't shake, and Caleb's only getting started, his mind a weapon sharpened by years of being underestimated, years of being dismissed, years of turning their rules against them. This isn't a trial anymore. It's a reckoning, and the stage is set for the twist that'll bring it all crashing down. The air in the courtroom thickens until it's a living thing, heavy and electric, pressing against every chest, every throat, as Caleb Jackson stands at the edge of the defendant's table, his gaze locked onto Judge Harold Grayson like a hunter staring down a beast that's too proud to see the snare. The crowd's murmurs fade to a hush, the reporters' pens hover, the ceiling fans hum their lazy tune, but all of it drowns under the weight of this moment, this one shot, this one move that Caleb's been building toward, step by calculated step. He's got no lawyer, no degree, no fancy title, just a stack of papers, a second-hand jacket, and a mind that's turned the law into a blade he's about to swing. "Your Honor," he says, his voice steady as granite cutting through the heat, the sneers, the years of disdain piled up in this room. "I'd like to submit evidence under Georgia Code the 17th of August, 71, my right to a fair defense guaranteed by the state you swore to uphold." Grayson squints, his white brows knitting together, his smirk twisting into something sour. "What are you blabbering about now, boy?" He snaps, leaning forward, his gavel twitching in his hand like he's itching to slam it and end this. Caleb doesn't blink. He unfolds a paper from his stack, a crisp printout of the statute, its edges worn but the text sharp, and he reads aloud, slow and deliberate, letting every word land like a stone. "A defendant may present evidence to contradict witness testimony," he says, his voice rising just enough to carry to the back of the room, to the reporters, to the locals who've started to sit up straighter. "I've got a witness, Your Honor, and I'm calling her now." Grayson's eyes narrow, his chuckle dying in his throat, replaced by a scowl. "What witness? This is nonsense," he barks. But Caleb's already turning, his voice ringing out clear and firm. "Mrs. Lena Carter, please take the stand." The room gasps, a collective intake of breath, as a black woman rises from the back row, 50s, her gray-streaked hair pulled tight in a bun, her floral dress faded but neat, her steps steady as she walks forward. Lena Carter, a store regular, a quiet fixture in Macon, who's seen more than she's ever said until now. Grayson slams his gavel, the cracks splitting the air, his face reddening. "This is a circus." "Sit down, both of you," he roars, but Caleb cuts through, calm as a blade sliding into place. "She's listed, Your Honor. Check the docket. I filed her as a witness this morning. All legal, all by the book." Ellis, the prosecutor, fumbles with his papers, his slick hair falling into his eyes, his voice rising in a weak protest. "Your Honor, this isn't," but the bailiff steps forward, flipping through the clipboard and nods once, sharp and reluctant. "She's on the list, sir," he says, and Grayson's glare could melt steel, but he can't stop it, not yet. Luna reaches the stand, her hands trembling just a little as she swears in, but her voice is soft, sure, a quiet strength threading through it. "I was there," she says, her eyes flicking to Caleb, then to the crowd. "I saw Vernon yell at Caleb, shove him first right there in the store. Caleb didn't touch him, didn't swing, didn't fight. He just turned and walked away." The crowd erupts, murmurs swelling to a roar. Heads turning, eyes wide, the reporters scribbling like their pens are on fire. Grayson slams his gavel again, harder, his voice a growl. "She's lying. This is a setup." But Caleb doesn't flinch. He pulls out another paper, an affidavit, notarized, its seal gleaming in the dim light. "Here's her statement," he says, holding it up, letting the crowd see it, letting Grayson feel it. "Sworn and signed, dated yesterday. And that's not all. I've got the store's second camera feed, submitted to the clerk this morning. It shows Vernon lunging at me stepping back, no contact, no assault, just a clerk losing his temper and lying about it." Grayson's face goes crimson, his breath hitching, his gavel limp in his hand. "You can't just," he starts. But Caleb rolls on, his voice rising now, a tide that won't be stopped. "Federal precedent. Brady v. Maryland, 1963, exculpatory evidence must be heard, must be considered. You deny this, Your Honor, and you're not just breaking your oath, you're breaking the law you claim to serve." The room freezes. Time itself seems to halt, the air so thick you could choke on it. Grayson's jaw drops, his pale eyes wide, his smug mask shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces, falling to the floor like glass. Ellis stammers, "Objection. This is improper." But it's weak. A whisper against the storm Caleb's unleashed. The crowd's on its feet now, some cheering, some shouting, the reporters leaping up, cameras flashing, the chaos swallowing Grayson's fading control. Caleb stands taller, his worn jacket suddenly a mantle, his voice a thunderclap rolling over the room. "I'm no lawyer, Your Honor," he says, his eyes locked on Grayson, burning through him. "But I know my rights. I know the law better than you thought I could, better than you wanted me to. You don't get to laugh them away. Not today, not ever." The twist lands like a bomb. Grayson stunned, speechless, his hands trembling, his kingdom crumbling under the weight of a black man's genius. The crowd roars. The truth cuts through the racism like a blade through flesh, and Caleb stands there, unshaken, unbreakable, the victor in a fight Grayson never saw coming. Caleb's name rises higher, a beacon, a symbol, a flame for the oppressed, proof that intellect and grit can topple giants, that the law isn't just for those with money or titles, but for anyone brave enough to wield it. He's back home that night, Lila asleep on the couch, her homework scattered beside her, and he sits at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, staring out at the streetlights flickering through the window. He's not a lawyer, not yet, but he's something more, a fighter who turned their rules into whose victory, a man who took their laughter and made it a weapon. The phone rings, offers now, from activists, from law firms, from people who see what he did and want him to do it again. Bigger, louder. He doesn't answer. Not tonight. Tonight he's just Caleb, a father, a survivor, a black man who stood tall and won. Grayson's career hangs by a thread, his laughter a ghost that haunts his robes, a sound no one will forget, but everyone will judge. The courthouse feels different now. Locals talk about it, reporters write about it, a shift in the air that says maybe, just maybe, the old ways are cracking. Caleb's triumph isn't just his, it's a spark, a fire catching in corners of the country where black voices have been silenced too long. The video's comments flood with stories. People who've faced their own Graysons, their own Vernons, their own fights, and they see themselves in Caleb, see hope, see power. This is Black triumph, raw, fierce, undeniable, a shout that echoes beyond Macon, beyond Georgia, beyond one courtroom into every heart that's ever been told it can't win. If this story hits you hard, if it lights something in you, smash that like button, hit subscribe, ring the bell. Don't let it fade. Tell us in the comments. Have you faced a fight like Caleb's? Have you stood up when they laughed you down? Drop it below, share it. Let's keep this roaring. This is Black Triumph Stories. We're here to tell the truth, to wield it, to make it sing every single time.